The next question asks something just as human, and I'll read it. It says, every time I take a break, I feel guilty. How do I rest without feeling like I'm falling behind? Every time I take a break, I feel guilty. How do I rest without feeling like I'm falling behind? You know, this is one of those questions that almost every high achiever whispers, but they rarely say it out loud because there's guilt around rest and it's worn like a badge of honor. You would hear people say things like, I'll rest when I'm done, but they're never done. We've built a culture that treats exhaustion like evidence of importance. And that's tragic because it turns human beings into machines that feel ashamed for being humans. So let's look at what's really going on here. The first thing we have to challenge is this. Rest is not the opposite of work. It's part of the work. Think about nature. Waves don't crash endlessly. They retreat before they return. The air doesn't bloom forever. It has seasons of stillness. In fact, even our hearts beat in rhythms of contraction and release. So why do you imagine that you can perform without pause? When you feel guilty for resting, it's not because rest is wrong. It's because your nervous system has been trained to feel unsafe when it's quiet. And that's not your fault. It's actually programming. This is where it gets personal. You've probably learned your model of rest from your primary caregivers, your parents, your guardians, or the early environment in which you grew up in. If rest was rare in your childhood, if you watched people hustle endlessly, fall asleep at the sewing machine, come home from work and still keep working, you unconsciously absorb the belief, rest is laziness, rest is unsafe, rest is for when everything is done. But life doesn't work like that because everything is never done. Your inner child might still be chasing approval through achievement. And every time you slow down, that part of you just panics because it thinks stopping means losing love or safety or identity. That's why rest feels guilty. You are not lazy. You are loyal to your old pattern. And that has to change. Let me give you a picture. Imagine a stone archway. What holds that archway together is not the stones. It's those spaces between them. That empty space is what gives the structure its strength. Rest functions the same way. It's not the absence of progress. It's the structure that makes progress sustainable. The Japanese even have a word for this. They call it ma, the pause that gives meaning to motion. Without space, music just becomes noise. Without rest, effort becomes exhaustion. And let me make this one practical and scientific. Research from the University of Illinois found that the human's brain's ability to focus drops dramatically after just 50 minutes of continuous work. But a short rest can fully restore performance levels. Another study in cognitive science showed that mind wandering during rest periods actually improved creative problem solving by over 40%. In fact, even elite athletes, I'm talking about Olympic level performers, they build rest into their training cycles. It's called deloading. They intentionally reduce intensity so that their bodies can rebuild back stronger. Meanwhile, many professionals run full 52 weeks a year and wonder why their performance declines. Burnout is not a personal failure. It's psychologically inevitable. If you've been always on for years, your nervous system has normalized high alert. When you try to rest, it rebels. You feel restless, anxious, even guilty. That's no weakness, it's withdrawal. Your body is detoxing from adrenaline. Rest will feel wrong before it feels right, but stay with it. The discomfort is a sign of healing. Your nervous system is learning that safety isn't only found in doing, it's also found in being. Let's talk about what happens when you don't rest. Chronic fatigue, irritability, brain fog, in fact, even immune breakdown. The WHO has declared burnout as a workplace epidemic in 2019. A Gallup study of 7,500 employees found out that 2/3 of these people experienced burnout at some point, and those who did were 63% more likely to take sick days and 23% more likely to visit the emergency room. Beyond the statistics, burnout kills creativity, empathy, and joy. You start to resent the very work that you once loved. You stop building and you start surviving. That's the real cost of restlessness. So here's how I would reframe it. Rest isn't what happens after productivity. It is what enables it. If you're always in motion, you're not productive. You're just busy. And busyness is often a socially acceptable form of avoidance. When you rest strategically, you actually multiply your output because you're working from restoration, not from depletion. One of my favorite quotes says, "You can't pour from an empty cup, but you can lead from a full one." That's not just poetic, it's practical, because even God has modeled rest for us. In Genesis, after 6 days of creation, he didn't rest because he was tired. He rested to set a rhythm, to teach us that creation and completion are two sides of the same coin. Rest is sacred because it honors both the giver and the gift. So how do you rest without guilt? Here's a simple rhythm that you can begin to use to rebuild your relationship with rest. The first one is to redefine rest. It's not just sleeping, it's anything that restores your energy. And you can get it through silence, music, nature, prayer, meditation, or even journaling. And then reclaim pockets of stillness. Learn to take 10 minutes between tasks to breathe, to stretch, to think. Then we move on to replace the script. When guilt shows up, don't fight it. Thank it. Say to it, "I see you, but I choose rhythm over rush." And then we have rehearse the habit. Build small repetitions. 1 hour a week of genuine rest is better than one vacation a year that is laced with anxiety. Healing your relationship with rest is like strengthening a muscle. It requires consistent resistance. You should think of rest like breathing. You can't exhale forever. Rest is that inhale before impact, the pause that fuels the next push. If you never breathe in, eventually you will suffocate on your own ambition. Rest is not running from your goals, it's running with grace. When you rest with intention, you don't lose time, you redeem it. You would come back sharper, stronger, and saner. So this week, I challenge you to take one guilt-free pause. Not because you've earned it, but because you need to keep building, one brick at a time. We've talked about visibility and rest. The next tension just sits at the intersection. So let's move to the next question.